Say you're at a wedding and you have to give a speech. There's no point launching into it until you've got everyone's attention, and that's not always the easiest thing to do. After all, the bride's uncle is fighting with the best man, the bride is choking on her shrimp cocktail, and there's a gaggle of kids trying to scale the wedding cake like it's Mount Everest. So you do what any seasoned speaker does. Well, the Puerto Rican anole lizards face a similar problem. They need to get their message out there among the hustle and bustle of the jungle. Problem is, they don't have a wine glass or a fork. Dr. Terry Ord, an evolutionary ecologist with the University of California, Davis, has been studying anole lizards to see just how they get a crowd to tune in to what they've got to say. Dr. Ord, welcome to Quirks and Quarks.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Tell me a bit about the anole lizards. What are they like?
They're small tropical lizards, and the particular species that I've been studying recently occur in the full shade forests in the mountain areas of Puerto Rico.
What do they look like?
They're very sort of dark in colour, about chocolatey sort of a colour. They have a crest on the tail, and they have a expandable dewlap or a throat fan, which they'll extend during their territorial displays.
What kind of messages are they trying to get out there?
Primarily males establishing territories in the environment, in the habitat. Basically, they're trying to establish a good territory that overlaps the home ranges of several females so that they can monopolise interactions and matings with those females. So the visual displays are meant to sort of discourage other territorial neighbours from infringing on their boundaries.
Now, when you say visual display, do you mean like inflating that throat thing you were talking about?
That and also producing push-ups and head bobs. So it's a combination of all those three things.
Now, why is it so hard for them to get other lizards' attention?
Well, it's, as I mentioned, these guys are living in an environment which is pretty dim. It's full shade, and I think you'd be quite surprised about how dim that actually is. So from that point, it's difficult to see any movement in that sort of environment. In addition to that, there's environmental motion in terms of the wind blowing the vegetation around. And the other thing is that these guys are trying to attract the attention of their neighbours, and their neighbours are probably about sort of 5 or 6 metres away. And for a lizard that's about the size of the palm of your hand, that's actually quite a distance. So all those factors together make communication in this system quite a formidable task. Now,
do they just communicate visually, or can they call to each other if they need to?
No, it's primarily visual. In fact, I think it's exclusively visual. They don't have the sort of vocal apparatus to produce any complex squeak or anything along those lines. So everything is centred on them being able to produce these visual push-ups and head bobs and that extension of the dewlap.
Well, how did you go about doing your experiment to find out how they get attention of other lizards before they actually start talking to them?
Well, I went out there with a video camcorder, and I spent several weeks just observing the animals and recording environmental variables such as the habitat light and the visual noise in the background. I was able to analyse from the video footage back in the lab using motion analysis software. And in essence, it was the idea was trying to work out if these things are designed to attract the attention of other animals in the environment, other lizards, then they should potentially add them more frequently when signal conditions are particularly difficult, when signal detection is likely to be compromised. And by doing these observational empirical style of studies, coming back we find that there is this quite dramatic correlation between how difficult the environment is for communication and the probability of these animals actually adding these exaggerated four-legged push-ups.
Now, did you do your experiment just by videotaping these things, or did you actually try to test them in some way to see if that was really true?
Well, so you can get compelling evidence just by association. Okay, they're adding these exaggerated movements when the environment is particularly difficult. But really, we want to be able to get in there and experimentally manipulate the system. And to do that, I developed this robotic lizard, which I can program to perform virtually any display. It could be a display that these lizards actually produce, or it could be a completely contrived display. The robot itself looks very realistic. It's made out of a latex model of an actual animal. and it's painted to look like another animal. So from the experiments that we're able to do, we can show that these animals are actually fooled by this robot. So it gives us a way to, in essence, present a display with and without an alert at the start.
So a robot lizard, it has moving legs and head and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it's got the whole works. It's even extending that dewlap as well. So it's the whole package.
What, you're sitting hiding in a bush with a remote control? How did you work it?
Well, it's actually deceptively simple. The robot's set up on a tripod, and we position the robot on that tripod behind a tree. So from the perspective of the lizard in the environment, it just looks like another territorial neighbour hanging out on the tree. And I switch it on, and I walk off and hide behind a bush, and there's a delay, and after a certain amount of time, the robot will start to display.
And what was the reaction to the lizards?
Well, the reaction that we were specifically measuring is how long it took for them to turn their head towards the robot.
Really?
Yeah.
So lizards were easily fooled. But did you prove though that four-legged push-up is their equivalent to the tinkling of the wine glass at the wedding?
Oh yes. So if conditions are ideal, so if there's no wind in the trees, so there's no movement in the environment, and it's bright light, it doesn't matter what the animals are actually adding to the beginning of their displays. The lizards will orient towards the robot regardless of what the intro is. Having said that, as soon as the environment starts to get difficult, this is when adding an alert really makes a difference, and they'll orient towards and they'll detect the displaying robot significantly more quickly if there is an exaggerated four-legged push-up placed at the start.
Maybe one of the reasons the lizards came over to check out your robot is because they're going, what the heck is he saying?
You know what? That's a really you never know. In fact, there was at least one instance where a lizard would come up to the robot and would get within about a metre, and he'd be sitting there and he'd stop responding, and you could almost wonder whether he just realised he'd been duped by something he thought was a territorial no, but it kind of doesn't look like that up close.
Something about that guy just not right here.
Yeah.
Dr. Ord, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Terry Ord is an evolutionary ecologist with the University of California, Davis.